He stepped off the bus, the familiar scent of his hometown washing over him like a wave of memories. After 10 long years working abroad, Mark was finally home. The streets looked the same, yet everything felt different, quieter, older, like time had moved on without him. He dragged his worn suitcase behind him, his mind racing with thoughts of reunion, comfort, and maybe even a fresh start. But just as he turned the corner near the old train station, something stopped him in his tracks. There, sitting quietly on the cold pavement, was a woman wrapped in a faded blanket, clutching a small child to her chest. Her face was pale, her eyes tired, and the child, no more than 3, was fast asleep, curled into her side. Mark couldn't look away. Something about her seemed familiar, though he couldn't place why. Her presence pulled at something deep inside him. He tried to walk on, telling himself it wasn't his problem, but his feet wouldn't move. The woman looked up, meeting his eyes for just a second. In that moment, everything changed. Her expression was more than just exhaustion, it was recognition. Mark's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? No, it couldn't. He hadn't seen her in over a decade. She was supposed to be gone, living a new life far from here. But the longer he stared, the more certain he became. Questions flooded his mind. Why was she here? And with a child? Before he could speak, the little one stirred, looking up with wide eyes that reminded him of someone he once knew. His past, long buried, was suddenly standing right in front of him. And with it, a truth he never expected to face. What happened in those 10 years? And why was she homeless now? Mark stood frozen, his breath catching in his throat. The woman looked away quickly, as if hoping he hadn't really seen her. But he had. There was no mistaking it now. It was Julia. The girl he had once loved more than anyone. The girl he had planned a future with before he left for work overseas. 10 years had passed, and yet here she was, on the street, holding a child, with eyes that told 1,000 untold stories. His mind raced with questions. What happened to her? Where was her family? Was the child hers? And most of all, why didn't she ever reach out? Back then, they had promised to wait for each other. But not long after he left, her messages stopped. No calls, no letters. He thought maybe she had moved on, maybe even married someone else. He tried to let her go. But now, standing just feet away from her, he realized he never truly had. The little boy shifted again, clutching tighter to Julia's coat. Mark noticed how thin the fabric was, how worn her shoes looked. Winter wasn't far off, and they didn't even seem to have proper shelter. Still, Julia didn't ask for anything. She didn't speak. She just sat there, eyes cast downward, as if hoping the world wouldn't see her. Mark took a hesitant step forward, but 100 doubts held him back. What if she didn't want help? What if the past had left wounds too deep to reopen? But he couldn't ignore the tightness in his chest, or the feeling that he had somehow returned home for a reason bigger than himself. The wind picked up. He finally said her name. Quietly, Julia. She looked up again, slowly this time. And then she whispered his name. Her voice was barely audible, but it hit Mark like a thunderclap. He hadn't heard his name spoken like that in years, soft, unsure, full of emotion. Julia didn't look angry or glad. She looked lost, as if part of her didn't believe he was really there. Mark stepped closer, kneeling beside her. The little boy looked up with sleepy eyes, his small hand gripping Julia's tightly. Mark didn't know what to say. There was too much. Too many years, too many questions. But before he could speak again, Julia looked away and said quietly, "You shouldn't be here." Her words stung, but he could see in her trembling hands and shaky breath that she wasn't pushing him away out of anger. There was fear, maybe shame. He glanced at the boy, then back at her. "Is he?" he started to ask, but stopped himself. Julia shook her head slowly. "Not yours," she said, almost as if she'd heard the question 100 times in her own mind. But that only led to more questions. Whose child was he? Where was the father? Why was she alone, homeless? and in such a state. Mark tried to offer her help, a warm meal, a place to stay even just for the night, but Julia refused, tightening her grip on her son. "We can't. It's not safe," she whispered. "Not safe." The words echoed in his head. What danger could she possibly be in now? Mark's instincts flared. Had someone hurt her? Was someone still looking for her? He wanted answers, but Julia wouldn't meet his eyes anymore. She seemed torn, like she wanted to speak but couldn't, or wasn't allowed to. The little boy leaned against her, too tired to understand the weight in the air. Mark didn't move. He wouldn't leave her again. Not this time. Mark sat down beside them, ignoring the stares from people passing by. The ground was cold, but the weight in the air was heavier. He didn't speak. He just stayed close, hoping his presence might break whatever wall Julia had built around herself. She kept her eyes low, brushing strands of hair from the little boy's forehead. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of things unsaid. Minutes passed, maybe longer, before she finally whispered, "They might be watching." Her voice trembled, barely louder than the wind. Mark turned sharply. "Who?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Julia glanced around quickly, then shook her head. "I can't say, not here." She looked at her son, then at Mark. "He's all I have. I can't lose him." The way she said it made Mark's chest tighten. This wasn't just about being homeless. This was about running, hiding. Whatever had happened in the past 10 years hadn't just left her broken. It had left her afraid, and not just of her situation, but of being found. Mark leaned in closer. "Let me help. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." Julia hesitated, her eyes filling with tears she didn't let fall. "They don't forget, Mark, and they don't forgive. If they know I spoke to you." A loud car door slammed in the distance. Julia flinched. Mark instinctively turned toward the noise, scanning the street. It was just a delivery van, nothing more. But Julia's reaction wasn't normal. It was fear born from something real. She stood up quickly, clutching her son, ready to leave. "I shouldn't have stayed this long." Mark rose with her, heart pounding. He didn't understand everything, but one thing was clear. Whatever she was running from was still out there, and it wasn't finished. Julia pulled her coat tighter around her son as she started to walk away, her steps quick and uneven. Mark followed beside her, not pushing, just staying close. He didn't know where she was going, but he wasn't letting her disappear again, not like this. The street lights flickered on above them, casting long shadows as the city grew darker. Something about the silence in the air felt wrong, like they were being watched. Suddenly, Julia stopped near a narrow alley and turned to him. "You can't be seen with us. If they recognize you, they'll come after you too." Her words hit him harder than he expected. Who were they and what did they want? Before Mark could answer, a dark SUV rolled slowly past the corner. Julia pulled her hood down quickly and stepped back, hiding her son behind her. The vehicle didn't stop, but Julia's reaction said everything. This wasn't a random car. Mark watched it fade down the street, his gut twisting. This was bigger than he thought. Then came the second blow. Julia reached into her coat and pulled out a crumpled envelope. She shoved it into his hand. "If anything happens to me, find this address. Someone there will explain everything." Mark stared at the envelope, confused. But before he could ask, the little boy tugged on Julia's sleeve and pointed across the street. A man in a grey hoodie was standing there, not moving, just watching them. His face was hard to see, but he wasn't blinking. He wasn't just curious. He was waiting. Julia's face went pale. "We have to go, now." Mark didn't argue. He grabbed the envelope, shoved it into his pocket, and followed her into the shadows. But deep down he knew, he wasn't just caught in her past now. He was part of it. They ran through narrow back streets, Julia leading the way with her son pressed close. Mark followed, the envelope in his pocket crinkling with every step. His heart was racing, not just from the chase, but from the weight of not knowing what he'd just stepped into. They finally ducked into an old building behind a shuttered shop, the door creaking as Julia locked it behind them. Inside, the air was musty and cold. Julia sank to the floor, holding her son tight. "This used to be safe," she whispered, "but I don't know anymore." Mark sat beside her and finally pulled out the envelope. He opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a photo, Julia standing next to a man in uniform. Behind them, a government building. On the back was a scribbled note. Asterisk, she knows too much. Keep her quiet, asterisk. Mark looked up, his voice dry. This is about your old job." Julia nodded, eyes filled with pain. "I worked as a translator for a private security group overseas. I found something I wasn't supposed to. They thought I was gone after the investigation disappeared, but I had proof. I ran." Mark shook his head. "Why didn't you come to me?" "I thought I could protect you by staying away," she said, tears finally falling. Just then, a knock echoed through the building. Not loud, but steady, 3 times. Mark stood, heart pounding. He opened the door a crack. On the other side was an older man, grey hair, worn coat, but familiar. Mark froze. "Dad." His father stepped forward. "I've been the one protecting her, son. You weren't supposed to find her yet." Mark's eyes widened, mind spinning. All this time, the truth had been closer than he ever imagined. Mark stood frozen, staring at the man he hadn't seen in years. His father looked older, more tired, but there was a calmness in his eyes that Mark didn't recognize before. Julia, too, seemed stunned, but not afraid. Slowly, she stood, still holding her son, and nodded toward the older man. "He's been our contact," she said softly. "He kept us off their radar, moved us when it got too close." Mark's mind reeled. "You knew she was alive, all this time?" His father sighed. "I had to make choices, son. You were safer not knowing. They watched you for a while. We couldn't risk it." It wasn't easy to take in, but suddenly the pieces began falling into place. The silence, the distance, Julia's disappearance, even the feeling that something back home had always felt unfinished. It all connected now. They spent the night in that old building, finally safe, at least for now. Julia shared more of her story. The group she once worked for had buried evidence, and when she spoke out, she became a threat. But with Mark's father's help, she stayed one step ahead. Now, with Mark back, things could change. They weren't alone anymore. By morning, plans were in motion. Julia was going to testify again, with stronger protection this time. Mark promised to stay, to help her and the child he now saw as part of his life. His father, too, would stand beside them, this time in the open. As they stepped into the early morning light, Mark looked at Julia and smiled, the weight finally lifting. He hadn't expected any of this when he came home. But sometimes coming back doesn't just bring you home, it brings you to the truth. And sometimes, even the past can give you a second chance.